Now that the 2014 NFL regular season is officially over, one of the things that we discuss is who deserves to win certain awards. And of course, the award that tends to stand out as being the one that has the most prestige and the most importance is the NFL's Most Valuable Player Award. And I think as 2014 went along, and especially by the time we got to the midpoint of the season, there were really three candidates that were established as being a cut above the rest. And that's pretty much how it played out through the second half of the season. And when I envision what may happen in the MVP voting, I would think that it'll be one of these three guys that I'm about to mention that will end up winning the award. That's either going to be J.J. Watt, the defensive end of the Houston Texans, Aaron Rodgers, the quarterback of the Green Bay Packers, or DeMarco Murray, the running back of the Dallas Cowboys. And there is no question in my mind that all three of these guys are very worthy MVP candidates. And if any one of these three guys does end up winning the MVP award, I'm not going to have a whole lot of complaints because I can make just as many arguments for and against each of the guys compared to the other two. So as a result, it's kind of a pack of three where no one individual has really truly distinguished themselves that much above anybody else. So I'm not going to sit there and have great outrage because this guy won it over this guy and this guy really deserved it, because I don't necessarily see that as the case with this 2014 season. But the ultimate question is who should win the 2014 NFL Most Valuable Player Award, and that's what I'm going to try and determine here. So what I'm going to do is talk about each of the three candidates, J.J. Watt, Aaron Rodgers, DeMarco Murray, give you some arguments for them being the MVP, maybe some arguments against, and then give you my ultimate choice. I'm going to start with J.J. Watt. And there's no question in my mind that he is hands down the best defensive player in the National Football League, and I'm not even sure it's close. There is just no defensive player that commands more respect, more attention, more fear from opposing coaches and offenses than J.J. Watt. You're talking about a guy, again, that dominates, it seems like, each and every single game that he's in. Not only is he the best defensive player in the National Football League, some may argue that he's the best player, period, in all of the National Football League. You're talking about a Texans team that went 2-14 in 2013, that this year, with J.J. Watt having that dominant year in part, they had a big turnaround and they ended up going 9-7 and came this close to making the playoffs. He was by far the best player on that team that had a 7-win improvement from the previous season. You're also talking about a J.J. Watt that finished the year with 20 and a half sacks. You know, this is the only player in NFL history to have multiple 20-plus sack seasons. Think about that. Even Lawrence Taylor never accomplished that. Reggie White never accomplished that. Bruce Smith never accomplished that. Even a great pass rusher from the past like Mark Gastineau never accomplished that. But J.J. Watt has. He also scored 5 total touchdowns. I mean, he was doing things on offense, which I think kind of really helps boast his candidacy as well. It wasn't just making an impact on the defensive side of the ball. He was making an impact on the offensive side of the ball at times in the red zone. And he scored 5 touchdowns as a defensive player, playing sometimes in certain situations on offense. There are a lot of arguments you can make for J.J. Watt. I mean, if any defensive player in the league is going to win an MVP award and be the first guy to do it since LT in '86, it's got to be J.J. Watt. There's also a very strong pro-J.J. Watt narrative, which can't be dismissed. It feels like the time is right. It feels like the guy is right. It feels like the right time to do this thing. With that said, though, I do have to point out a couple of things. First off is that while the Texans went from winning 2 games last year to 9 games this year, keep in mind that 6 of their 9 wins came against teams that are picking in the top 5 of the 2015 NFL Draft. 2 victories over the Jaguars, 2 victories over the Titans, a victory over the Raiders, a victory over the Redskins. 6 victories against teams picking in the top 5 of the draft. You could say, yeah, J.J. Watt was incredibly dominant, but he was dominant against a relatively soft schedule, and that's very true. You can only play against who you're scheduled against, that's true, but I mean, let's be realistic here. It wasn't like he was dominating the greatest opponents, the greatest teams every single week. Furthermore, he dominated last year too, maybe not quite so much statistically, But he was still a dominant player last year, and the Texans still went 2-14. So he was dominant last year, no question, even if the statistics don't quite bear that out as much. If you watch the Texans, you saw how much he dominated even last year, maybe even more so than he did in his Defensive Player of the year of 2012. He still was incredibly dominant. And he was just a little bit more dominant maybe this year. So was that the single biggest reason why the Texans went from winning 2 games to winning 9 games? I don't know about all that. And it's not like he's on a team totally devoid of talent. You've got Arian Foster in the backfield on offense. You've got Andre Johnson, DeAndre Hopkins at wide receiver on offense. It wasn't like he's the only guy on that team. And even with that being said, as dominant as he was, the Texans' defense was good, but they weren't a dominant unit. They were still middle of the pack in the league when it came to yards allowed. So I don't think, as much as many media members will try and tell you, that this is just a slam dunk case for J.J. Watt. And then we go to Aaron Rodgers. A lot of arguments to make for him. The Green Bay Packers finished 12-4, won the NFC North, ensured themselves of a first-round bye in at least one home playoff game. You're talking about a quarterback that can impact every offensive play, not to mention the fact that he can have an impact on your defensive side of the ball by protecting your own defense, keeping them off of the field, and putting them in good situations because the offense can score a lot of points. You also see, whereas with J.J. Watt, he was dominant in 13, dominant again, maybe a little more so, granted, in 14. So he was still the same player, and the Texans went from 2 wins to 9 wins. You could see a big difference with the Packers in 2013 when they didn't have Aaron Rodgers, where they missed him for half the season. They barely won the NFC North at 8-7-1. And then this year, when they had him basically for the entire year, they went 12-4, won the division, and got a first-round bye. I mean, here are the Green Bay Packers in a very tough division, in a very tough conference at least, having to win 12 games just to get a first-round bye. And you clearly can see, unlike with J.J. Watt, just how much impact a Rodgers can have when he's on the field versus when he isn't. It's very tangible. It's very understandable, where it's not so much with J.J. Watt. It's a little more of a gray area. You're also talking about an Aaron Rodgers that had 40 total touchdowns this season, 38 through the air and 2 on the ground, versus only 7 total turnovers, 5 interceptions, and 2 fumbles lost. That is a 5-point plus to 1 touchdown to turnover ratio. That's special type of stuff. A quarterback rating of 112. You're talking about a guy who plays the most important position in the National Football League. Everybody agrees, and it's widely viewed, and understandably so, that this is the best player at the most important position in the National Football League. And he has the statistical dominance to show that. His team also has the record to indicate just how important he is. A lot of arguments you can make for him. When you look at Rodgers, though, he did have some real clunkers this year against some very good defenses. Seattle, Detroit, Buffalo. Sometimes that stuff's going to happen. But he was very, very bad in those games. And those are games against really good teams in the case of Seattle and Detroit, at least on the defensive side of the ball. And you can't dismiss the Bills' defense. They were a very good defensive unit this year, too. You saw what they did to Peyton Manning. So he had some real clunkers against some good teams. And when you look at his statistical dominance compared to other quarterbacks, while he might have had the best statistical season all around, in terms of total balance as a quarterback, was he really so far head and shoulders above everybody else that he's just a slam dunk choice here? I don't think that's necessarily the case. And, that's kind of the way I look at it when it comes to Rodgers. And then we get to DeMarco Murray. You're looking at a DeMarco Murray where the Cowboys in 2013 and the past few years before that had went 8-8. This year they go 12-4. What is one of the major things that changed that led to the Cowboys making that type of turnaround and making that big leap in improvement to going from 8-8, missing the playoffs, to this year going 12-4, making the playoffs, winning their division, getting a home playoff game? It's the fact that DeMarco Murray was featured more. It was the fact that DeMarco Murray became that guy in that offense for that team. I mean, he was the difference maker. He was the league's leading rusher by almost 500 yards. So from a statistical standpoint, he was dominant compared to everybody else at his position in the National Football League. A guy with 12 games of 100-plus yards. That's three-quarters of the games of the season, including the first 8 to start off the year, which was an NFL record of 100-plus yards. This guy was consistent all throughout the year. He scored touchdowns in 11 of his team's 16 games. And what else was he able to do? He allowed the Cowboys to keep the defense off the field, which was important. He took a lot of pressure off of Tony Romo to where they didn't have to get as pass happy. You can really look and see the Cowboys of previous years versus the Cowboys of this year and see what really changed. Similar to like you do with Aaron Rodgers, you see he wasn't there for half of 2013. They barely made the playoffs. He was there the full year this year. You see the improvement. You see the difference that is made. You can also tangibly see that difference that's made because of DeMarco Murray. He's not the only change, but he's the biggest, most important change. They featured him more. They emphasized him more. And as a result, they got more out of him. They got more out of that offense, and they got more out of everything as a team. And as a result, went from 8-8 to 12-4. DeMarco Murray had a huge impact on the Dallas Cowboys. I referenced it before the season, even though I didn't think that this team was going to win more than 4 or 5 games, and obviously I was wrong, and a lot of you were too. I said the one key is DeMarco Murray because they have to pound the rock with him. They have to become a run-first team. They at least, if anything else, have to have that run identity. And they had a physical run identity that has been lacking for years, maybe going all the way back, frankly, to the Emmitt Smith, Aikman, Irvin days of the 90s. Murray brought that this year. So there are a lot of arguments I could make for him. In terms of against him, though, you have that narrative, and obviously so, and deservedly so, about that a lot of people could have great success behind that offensive line that has 3 first-round picks in Tyron Smith, Travis Frederick, and Zach Martin. And that's very true. There were a lot of times we watched DeMarco Murray didn't get touched until he was 4 or 5 yards past the line of scrimmage. Very easy to have success as a running back when you have that type of quality run blocking in front of you. You also have to look at the talent around him on offense, too. It's not like in Adrian Peterson's case, he was the unquestioned guy, and you could say, well, that's all they really had in 2012 for the Vikings. Can't really say that with DeMarco Murray. Tony Romo had a really quality season. If he would have been just a little bit better statistically, we might be talking about him as a legitimate MVP candidate, and frankly, maybe we should. He also has Dez Bryant, one of the truly best wide receivers in the National Football League, who scored the most touchdowns on offense for that Cowboys team. Along with that offensive line, Jason Witten at tight end, Terrence Williams at the other wide receiver. It's easy to see how DeMarco Murray could have a successful season. You pound the rock with him a ton, and things are opened up because you can't just put 8 men in the box all the time because Dez Bryant's going to kill you, or Jason Witten will kill you over the middle, or occasionally Terrence Williams will kill you deep. You can't sit there and get too crazy and too aggressive in what you do to try and stop the running game. So there are arguments to be made against DeMarco Murray as well. Like I said, I don't think this is as cut and dry as anybody's going to try and tell you. Some people just clearly say that this is J.J. Watt's year FTW, and no, that's not the case. Some people may sit there and say that since Aaron Rodgers is a quarterback, quarterbacks traditionally win the MVP award, even though MVP does not include the letters QB in it, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a QB, but they're going to say he's the best player at the most important position, and he had the best season for a quarterback in 2014, therefore he deserves to win it. Again, good arguments just like with J.J. Watt, but that doesn't mean he's a slam dunk pick. In my case, for my money, based off of what happened in 2014, expectations heading into the season, what actually happened, importance to team, and the way that I could tangibly qualify and quantify what an individual's impact was on his team, even with some of the things I could say against his candidacy, I'm going to have to go with DeMarco Murray. I'm going to have to. You could see the impact he made on America's team. You could see how much better off Tony Romo was because of DeMarco Murray. You could see how much better off a Dez Bryant was because of a DeMarco Murray. You could see how much better off the Cowboys' defense was because of DeMarco Murray. You could see how much better off the Dallas Cowboys as a team were because of DeMarco Murray. He was the best running back in the league in 2014. There's no question about that. And I think no player had a greater single impact on his team's turnaround or team's performance in 2014 than DeMarco Murray. the running back from the Dallas Cowboys, and that's why he's my choice for the 2014 NFL Most Valuable Player.